Welcome back to the Donkey Vote podcast with Francis.
Tobias.
And George. These interviews will be focusing on the past careers of politicians before they entered parliament.
With a strong intention to our audience that anything is achievable no matter what you studied in university or college.
If you like this sort of content, please make sure you like, subscribe, comment, and share with your friends. Also, we are on YouTube and Spotify, so make sure you follow us on those platforms.
Make sure to follow us on Instagram as well to keep updated with the latest episodes and reels that we release.
Enjoy
the
the
interview.
Today we are joined by Adrian Roos, the Democratic Alliance member from Gauteng. I've had very much trouble with pronouncing that specific province over the past couple of weeks, but great to have you, Adrian, on the podcast.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And yeah, greetings to everybody. Yeah,
Yes.
it's Gauteng, so you kind of have to
Gauteng. Yeah.
you sort of honkarugi, then you're halfway there.
It's especially for foreigners, especially it'd be extremely difficult to pronounce.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you again, Adrian, for coming on. But just for our audience out there who may not know an entire lot about you and about your home province, of course, could you give us a little brief description of yourself just before we get into the questions?
Yeah, sure. So I'm lucky enough to be a member of Parliament in the South African Parliament in the National Assembly. Now I'm on the Home Affairs Committee. So
Mm.
we basically we get lots of inquiries on a daily basis.
Oh, yes.
Before that, I was in the Council of Tshwane. So Tshwane is the
Oh,
capital city of South Africa. So I was there for a number of years, and then I've been in Parliament. This is the sixth year now.
I see. And I've heard quite a bit about the City Council of Tshwane in the last couple of days. There's been a bit of controversy there in terms of, certain political parties changing support to different political parties and, to change and flip the mayor at this point in time.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we have a fantastic mayor, Celeste Brink, who's come in and done a very difficult job. I mean, to turn
Mm,
around a city, the financial mess that it was left in,
mm,
and really a lot of very, very hard work by him and his MMCs. And unfortunately, some other political parties have decided that to put in a motion of no confidence.
mm,
And clearly, unfortunately, that there's no basis to that, and there's other factors at play over there. So
mm,
we're certainly fighting. We'll be putting Celeste Brink back as a candidate
mm.
when that next council meeting comes, and hopefully the other party will come to their senses in this regard. Because at the end of the day, it's for the people of the city. I
Exactly.
think if you
Mm,
play political games, it's one thing to play political games, but we're really playing with people's day-to-day
exactly.
lives, their
Mm.
livelihoods, the roads they drive on, the electricity.
Yeah.
The failure of these things over the years has affected businesses.
Oh,
This
yeah.
is not something to really play with, and
Mm,
that's why we fight
exactly.
in Parliament
Yeah,
regard.
and sometimes as well, playing with politics in this sort of circumstance is really, really, you know, detrimental because maybe I guess we're going to talk is I mean it's mainly with Action SA as those who are familiar with the issue would know of, but maybe just to try and get like a higher position on the council or just to get a little bit more power, I guess, within a coalition. Um, in a sense, is probably not as important to improving the lives of all people within Twane. So I guess some persons' greed does have detrimental effects towards the livability and the economic prosperity of certain regions within South Africa.
Yeah, and that's why it's important. The Democratic Alliance, the party I'm with, we are very serious about being based on values. And
Mm,
if you're a values-driven party, then the decisions you make and that are based on your values. They're not
exactly.
on the expediency of day-to-day politics.
Mm,
So if other parties are basing their decisions and that on data, the expediency of certain positions in that. This
it's
is why I think
detrimental.
the Democratic Alliance as well is growing, because people are getting tired of that kind of politics, and they
Mm.
want politics based on values.
Exactly, exactly. 100% agree with you there, Adrian. So I think we'll move on into our questions now. So my first question actually to you is, how was your high school and university life, and do you have any memorable moments you'd like to share? on the podcast?
Well, it seems like a long time ago. I mean, so in South Africa, we call it matriculate. That's when they kick you out. That was in 1993.
Too long ago,
So
Adrian.
that was quite a while back. Yeah, I mean, I started high school in a boarding school. So it's because we
Oh,
lived in a fairly remote area. And yeah, some really, a lot of history in that. And those were the good old days of boarding schools.
mm,
That has definitely changed in modern times. Probably one of the most enduring memories is of the Call the Ghost, and we had there was a picture in the quad of a rugby team, and I think it was the 1913 rugby team, and one of the players was ex-Lieben, and in the picture is these old sepia pictures, but he's got this sort of look like this, and the legend went that ex-Lieben had was going for a try, and he dived. And as he was diving, then they called them a new boy. So that's the first grade that comes in. Called out, and he turned to the side and he dived into the rugby pole, and he split the back of his head and he died. But then they propped him up to take the picture. So clearly now that's a bit of a silly story, but the matrics, the seniors, they build this up over the first sort of 6 weeks of school. And then, yeah, the one night, then you have this event when suddenly you're in the prep hall and they say ex-Lieben is here, and you had to learn the names of the rugby team. But what the seniors had then done is they decorated the entire hostel and made it all spooky and blankets and this and that. And they were all dressed up themselves. And then you had this whole experience where you were taken through this thing blindfolded, and you ended up in the locker room facing ex-Lieben, who was the basically the house captain, and you had to now name the rugby team. But the whole experience was really fantastic afterwards, just because it was a very traditional school, so the
sounds
matrics
very,
were to
very
be
much like a,
cleared, and you had to,
like an
yeah,
all
but
boys sort of traditional boarding school that you just described there. From I guess from my experience, I didn't go to boarding school, of course, but I had that experience of going to an all boys school, and it is quite different, of course, than going to co-educational school where have both sexes.
yeah, yeah. No,
Um,
so yeah, and that was it's a great experience because for the first time you really get to have a good experience with the seniors.
mm. And going on to university as well, Adrian, what did you end up studying, and do you have any memorable moments from there as well?
Yeah, look, I mean, for me, it was I had to pay my way through university, so I went to correspondence university
Oh,
and started working almost straight away. So I didn't really have that experience. The closest experience I had to that was quite recently when I went and did an MBA at UCT. And that was during COVID. So we had these fun experiences of having the first year of an MBA online and having 50 faces on a Zoom presentation,
mm.
and them saying, okay, right, you have to take a ball and then you have to call somebody's name and throw it to them. And, that was just sort of interaction. So even then I thought, flipping hell, finally you're going to get to have this interaction. And then luckily in the second year, once we were coming out of that, then we got to meet each other for the first time. So a lot of it was correspondence, and I'd already started working by the time I was in university.
I see. I see. And I guess in that sense, getting that sort of experience within university while working at the same time is really, really crucial towards, helping yourself in your career. Because sometimes at the end of the day, university is great and all, but, it doesn't really give you as much of the practical experience you need in terms of, working in an office, working in the corporate sector. Those sort of skills can be honed in university, but they can't be implemented on until you get out. So, experiencing that sort of life and having that, throughout your university career can really, really help you when you go and broaden your aspects and enter the workforce.
Yeah, I think the critical thing for people, and especially with the MBA, to remember is that it's the relationships you take out of a university that are absolutely critical. So yes, academics is really important, and I guess it depends on what you're studying. But those relationships take you a long way
Mm.
after you study. And specifically, with the MBA, that is something that I had missed and that I experienced since since that time, the tremendous contacts that I developed. And I think it's really important to also, if you're studying, try and reach out to different people. Don't stay in
Exactly.
one group all the time, because you will be amazed at how many times you come across these people in different walks of life. So, that's some advice I would give,
Mm.
unsolicited advice in that regard.
Exactly, exactly. I agree with that sort of advice there, Adrian. So moving on then to our next question for you. Prior to Parliament, you worked as a business manager for a computer foundation and Intergraph Systems company called in Southern South Africa for nearly 17 years. Sorry. Can you talk to us a bit about the companies you were the business manager of, and how did these opportunities prepare for you for Parliament? So yeah.
Yeah, so I was a business development manager, which is a nice word for sales and sales management. And actually, it's one of the funny things, because I never in a million years would have thought I'd end up being a politician.
Oh.
And the same with sales. I mean, I thought that sales was somebody shoving something down your throat and trying to get one
Hmm.
over you. So, I would never have thought that I would end up in that. And I actually studied computer science. That was my first degree.
Oh.
And then I was in the field of GIS, Geographic Information Systems. And there were really cool things happening at that stage.
Mm.
And my boss walked into the office one day and he said, "Well, you've been working really well with clients and you've got a great rapport with them and that. And so he wants me to try some sales." And so I was
Mm.
really not enthusiastic about it. But,
Oh.
he guided me through the process. And
Mm.
during that process, I started to realize that, yeah, if your attitude is that what you're trying to do is improve people's business, improve their
Exactly.
workflows, benefit them. And that's the realization that he put into me. It was Kevin Bure at that stage at Computer Foundation. And sometimes you just need someone to spot potential that you don't realize that you have, and then give you that correct perspective. And
Exactly.
so GIS, it's sort of satellite imagery, mapping systems, and all of that. But there's tremendous things you can do with it. So I ended up working with local government in the beginning, and then eventually with national government departments. So things like agriculture, obviously national mapping agencies, municipalities, to pick up where your debtors were, where there were problems, and that kind of thing. And what that helped me to do is to get a tremendous view over those years of
Mm.
different government departments, even public safety, for example, command and control systems, from telcos, utilities, those kind of systems. And you get a tremendous view of what is going on in the different government departments and the challenges they have. So that when you come to a political space, you're already very familiar over time with the challenges that people have. And being in business development and eventually getting to a more senior level in that, you started off obviously with entry level staff that you were working with and interacting with. And then you had more and more sort of senior engagements. So that also helped to hone the ability to work with persons from different spheres and
Mm.
different levels of life, um, which was really valuable at that stage, and how to communicate ideas at the right level. But also, again, it all became about how do you become a problem solver, and how do
Exactly.
you communicate? How do you engage with people to identify the real problem and not what you think it is?
And I guess in that sense, because you're working in such a high pressure environment, trying to churn out a lot of economic growth and that sort of thing with these businesses and increase productivity, you've got to find different ways to try and improve that sort of thing. So working with different people within different managerial positions and, different levels of staff is so important as a, sales marketer, as you like to call a business developer, manager. But yeah, in a sense as well, really trying to improve the viability of the business, really trying to, increase productivity and increase the overall satisfaction of customers and consumers are so important in that role, because at the end of the day, the people buying, your products are really the ones feeding you at that point. So you got to make sure they're satisfied and their satisfaction's high to achieve a good strong and a good strong business for many years to come.
Yeah, and the other important thing is to be authentic to yourself, you know. So I'm sure
Exactly.
that, you know, there are very slick salespersons, and especially earlier in my career, I could see them around, and they would sell ice to an Eskimo and go for it. And I think that was their genuine personality, and that for my personality was always, how can you assist? How can you improve things? How can you make things better? And by making that the focus, then it really helped me to be successful in that space. Um, and you know, even in the at one stage, I was lucky enough to have interactions with a career coach. And what they said to you is, you know, instead of looking at what job you want, like I want that job, look at the kind of value that you want to offer. And once you look at the value that you want to offer, I would almost say that the same value that I would want to offer as a business developer in that space, working with those government departments, is the same value that I want to add today as a member of parliament. And it really helps you to, you know, to do that analysis and say, you know, yes, there's a role and it pays a certain amount of money or whatever. But look at what value do you want to offer in the world. And sometimes you will find that there's multiple different roles in different spaces that you could actually fit into.
Mm.
And it can help you in your career as you go along, to identify opportunities to grow yourself, especially if you're in a space where maybe you've hit a ceiling or something, to just think that way. So I think, you know, that was very good advice that I got from a career planning point of view as well. So those same principles that I was using for there, I use it today when I engage with persons, even in home affairs, for example, where you're looking at the challenges, what are the challenges, and what are the potential solutions, and how do you put groups of stakeholders together that can bring that solution.
Mm. Exactly, exactly. That's the most important thing as a business manager or working anywhere within a business for sure. So moving on then to our next question, for you, Adrian, sorry. Additionally, you spent nearly 10 years actually working for NGOs and charities across South Africa, those being correct me if I'm wrong here with the pronunciation, Suku Sambe Children's Home and the Geo Information Society of South Africa. How important are these specific NGOs to South Africa, and what sort of roles and work did you conduct in these positions?
Well, I mean, in South Africa, civil society is very, very strong,
Mm,
and is a really important partner. Even in the DA, we really believe in the whole of society approach when approaching any sort of problem solving or identifying issues or challenges or solutions. The Sukasame Children's Home, it actually happened to be the house that my dad built many years ago on a plot. And I'd gone back there one day and seen a whole bunch of children out there, and they had been basically kicked out of a home where the funding had stopped. And so the person that ran that home had then taken them to this house. And then over the next few years, it was basically about building building an awareness of them, and then
mm,
also helping them to manage their funds. Because you want to get funding, but you don't have any accounts or books. So it was simple things like put your slips in an ice cream tin and let's get some basic accounting going. And how do you do this? And how do you present yourself to funders? But then also surrounding them with a network of local funders, your community chests. Bikers are fantastic in that regard. I mean, the Soweto bikers would come out once a year, and these were children that had cerebral palsy. So
oh wow.
sometimes you would think, so one of the interesting challenges there as well was the staff, because when I got there and got to know the staff, they were just feeding and changing the children. But as we went along, we got occupational therapists to come in and work with those staff. And over time, they suddenly started to see, heck, I actually made a difference. So some of the children, I really made a difference, and I actually developed, or there was a reaction. And so over that time, it was actually the investment in the staff as much as the investment in the kids, because we gave the kids experiences that they wouldn't have. um, that really made the difference there, because the staff suddenly started to have a different view of what their work meant. It wasn't just feeding and changing and cleaning up after the kids, that they could actually do some activities with them that would develop them and help them to grow. Uh, so, it was creating that environment around that home. And that's actually how I got into politics, because at one stage they wanted to close down that home.
Oh, wow.
The Department of Social Development wanted to stop the funding to that home and several homes
And those
through
homes are so
Gauteng.
crucial towards so many people as well.
Yeah, no, and then at that stage, I was working on a bid for the Eastern Cape Department of Health for an emergency medical services system for ambulances to route them, first response, that kind of thing. And I knew some of the shenanigans that were going on with money that was appropriated for helicopters to go and watch the World Cup and all of that kind of thing. So they had money. It's not that they didn't have money. And so then I got involved and started lobbying the Department of Health and Social Development to not close these schools down. And as I did that, I started to realize, I've done a lot of charity work and work like that. And that my real forte was there at the macro level and sorting out these issues. And we found that there were a number of homes that were trying to close. And a long story short, managed to stop that. So, that made me really realize I need to go and do this now more full time and pursue it more actively. I think the Geoinformatics Society, that was an industry association. And so really my main role there is we were trying to professionalize the industry of geoinformatics practitioners.
Mm.
So these were cartographers, people that do mapping, aerial photographers, and that kind of thing, and quite a niche market. But the challenge was in a government space, you had some very talented and valuable persons that could not get paid, because we have something called an occupation-specific dispensation, and that says you can get paid more, even though you're in a certain salary grade, if you have a scarce skill or something that can add value. So we needed to formalize the industry, develop unit standards with our qualifications authority, get people to do. So that was a whole process over the years. And then also there, I set up the Adopt a School, which was basically to get geoinformatics practitioners around the country to find their local school and engage with geography teachers. So we set up materials there to help geography teachers, because we realized a lot of them were not empowered to teach as they should. I mean, you would think they'd been through an education, they were empowered to teach and train people. It wasn't always the case. And so we gave them some CDs with some helpful hints, and it was developed with persons that have been in education, and then also developed a structure around the subject advisors. So we engaged with what we call parastatals. So parastatals are nationwide organizations, so like an ESCOM, even Statistics South Africa, and other parastatals like that, who had offices all over the country and who had persons that were doing this. And they backed us to allow their persons to go and interact with these subject advisors and help to grow that support network. So we set up that support network across the country. But the main thing was the professionalization of the industry, which we managed to achieve. So that industry, we now have the Spatial Data Infrastructure Act. We have professional registration for geoinformatics practitioners.
Mm.
We have occupation-specific dispensation so that they can get paid more in their organizations to have the right quality of person there. And that work is becoming more and more critical in national planning, to have spatial information. How do you do planning around where there are needs? So you look at schools, for example. So persons will often say, we need more schools, or we need a school in a rural area. But when you do the proper analysis of it, you will find that there's actually too many schools, but that you need to have fewer schools, some of them slightly moved around, and a higher concentration of better staff and a bigger number of staff in there. So rather transport some of the kids to the schools, the better schools. Um, and those are the kind of things that you would do with that. So it's uh, it was great, and you got to meet people from across the industry, from across the country. And yeah, so we managed to achieve that, which was a great outcome. That is now benefiting the country today. We have a spatial data infrastructure,
That was so important as
and
well,
yeah,
Yeah. It's and I guess as well, having that sort of experience, as you were saying, it's a similar problem we have to in Australia. Like a lot of rural schools, rural towns don't have, access to great education services. But then when you look at in reality in the metropolitan areas, there's so many schools that there's schools that have to and they're taking up so much stuff, or they might only have maybe say like 200 kids. Well, there's some schools in the rural areas that can't even run because they've got no teachers at all. So trying to find that sort of balance between them all is so crucial. And I'm really glad to hear that that legislation went past. So NGOs like the ones that you used to be running was as well supported, and the staff you worked because at the end of the day, those sort of staff members they could earn a lot more money, working in the private sector, that sort of thing. So they take the time out of their day to try and work for an NGO and in the public sector is really, really important. So, rewarding them with good and fair salaries and also providing more assistance from the government is so crucial to make sure that these NGOs, which really do help a lot of vulnerable people at a vulnerable time in their lives, better equipped, make them better equipped and better and more ready, I guess, to support these sort of people in these difficult circumstances. Yeah. So
yeah,
then,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. Sorry, Adrian. Yeah. Continue.
No, go for it. Go for it.
Oh, I was going to move on to the next question, but if you had something else to say as well at the end of that, or
No, no. I think again, it was just, I think it's also the thing as you in your career, there's a lot of focus now on social media and how do you build your profile, etc.
oh yes, especially in
And a lot
politics.
of Yeah, and a lot of it is growing networks and that, and getting involved in industry associations. It was always a challenge, and it's something that I would encourage people to do, to give a little bit of time to that and consideration if they are in those industries, to get involved in that and do that because you know it's only with people that are willing to spend that little bit of extra time, and often it's just some time in the evening, and obviously you need to get your employer's buy-in to spend some time of your working day as well. Obviously, you're building your network, and in a sales environment, it's helpful. But that giving a bit back in that space it's a very important thing. It's not a waste of time at all. It's not an inconvenience. So it's certainly something I would encourage people to look at. If you have an industry association too, there's many small roles that don't take a lot of time, but people filling those small roles means that persons that are looking at the bigger things are then freed to do that. So I would encourage
Exactly,
people to do
exactly. Exactly, 100% agree with you there, Adrian. So, moving on then to our next question for you. This is on a bit of a lighter note as well. So as an Australian listener, over the past years, there's been a lot of funny moments throughout South African Parliament, which are all over the internet. So, in your experience over these past 4 or 5 years, being elected to Parliament, was there anything that you experienced that you did not expect, or were you surprised about finding out? And what are some of your overall favorite moments being a part of South African Parliament over these last 4 to 5 years?
Yeah, look, I think one of the biggest things, and for anyone that's interested in getting into politics and that, you see it on TV, and you see, okay, they're in the National Assembly chamber and they're having a go at each other, and this one hates this one and this one hates that one. And then you get together behind the scenes, and everybody's chummy and hunky dory, and
I know.
how's your uncle,
I was
and
going to say
all
as
of
well,
that kind of.
Adrian. There's in Canberra. I've heard. I don't work in Canberra. I don't work for. I work for a state MP, not a federal MP. But what I've heard is there's a pub in Canberra, a pub there that all the MPs go to at the end of every sitting day, and they'll just casually have a chat. And not many people actually know about that. So people think, oh, two major parties, whether that be in South Africa, the ANC and Democratic Alliance, or whether that be in Australia, like the Liberal Party and Labour Party, they hate each other all the time. But at the end of the day, sometimes you'll, at the end of a sitting day, you come together, have a drink, have some food, and just relax a little bit because you know in the heat of the moment in Parliament, it is quite stressful and quite intense. So of course, you're going to be barging and saying what you want to say, but it's a good at least that you can calm down a bit, relax your senses and talk a bit more to about other things in life outside of politics, especially because politics and politicians have a very demanding job in general. So being able to transition and find a different balance is really really crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a saying in politics: there's no permanent friends and there's no permanent enemies.
Mm.
And so this kind of thing is it's there's obviously limits, and I'll be honest. In the current South African Parliament, there's certain people I really wouldn't have even have a cup
Uh,
glass of water with them. I
Maybe
would not
is
have.
it the ones wearing the berets or?
But yeah, to a large extent, it's absolutely critical because that is where politics is about influence, and at the end of the day, you need to get work done as well. And a lot of the work of Parliament happens behind the scenes in the committees, and even then behind those committees in the kind of discussions and relationships that are had. That's where agendas are set, and where the real nitty-gritty works gets done. And you might find yourself in opposition politics where you really don't have an actual say, and you can either use brute force or you
Mm,
can use a bit of honey sometimes. But
mm,
yeah, so but I think just in politics in general, you see the combative nature of it and the adversarial nature. So that was certainly
mm,
something that really surprised me is the amount of interaction you do have with
exactly.
opposition and that even people that are dramatically different in
Mm,
opinion to you. Um,
yeah.
that's there was one night even in council in Tshwane where we were now the difference between the National Assembly and local government. One of the big differences is your National Assembly, if it says you're going to meet from 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock, they're very strict with time. You sit in there, you're generally going to finish more or less at that time.
In
Whereas in
council
council,
though.
anyone at any stage can call for a caucus, and they can go and caucus for an hour, or they can caucus for 2 hours, and they call another one. So then the one night we were there till about 2:30, and I got home, and my wife, was telling her about it, and these guys were just caucusing, and we were sitting around there. And then the
Mm.
next day we had a sports day, and we were playing now football together, soccer, with those same guys, and chest bumping, and slapping each other. Yes, you scored, and all of that kind of thing. And she said, I don't know how the hell you do that.
It's
Um,
it's it's
but yeah,
quite crazy, honestly. But it's a good refresher to have.
yeah.
Yeah. I
That's
remember
that
hearing
dynamic,
yeah.
which is
I
what you don't
remember here as
expect.
well. Yeah, it's something you don't expect at all. And I remember here as well, my boss in state parliament here, they sat I think till 3 a.m. in the morning one night. So because there were some crossbenchers that were pushing amendments and for one of the bills, and it just took forever. And I think there was one point my boss he got so hungry that he just started eating 2 minute noodles outside the chamber because he was just starving because he'd been there for ages and ages. And I remember some of the other politicians were saying like because I remember going into Parliament the day after that happened and it was so dead. Nobody was speaking. Like everyone was half asleep still. Especially in the Legislative Council, so the National Council of Provinces, which would be the equivalent. Um, but yeah, it's good to have that sort of refresher and that good sort of um time away from politics. And I guess um if you're not beating them on if you're not beating them on the in the political field, of course you got to beat them on the sporting field, as you said, Adrian. So you got to beat them somewhere. So at least you get your payback there the next day. And I'm hopefully
Yeah.
your team won in that soccer contest.
Um, let's just say the game of soccer won. I can't remember what the score was.
Too long ago.
But
Ah.
yeah.
I mean, at least it wasn't a cricket or rugby match because that would have been that would have taken a long time or even been more um, physically taxing and
Yeah.
brutal.
Yeah.
And I'm up to my next question for you, Adrian. So, who would you say is your political role model or idol?
Yeah, like for me, when I started to really be of an age where I was interested in politics, it had to be Tony Leon. And
Oh,
Tony Leon was the leader of the Democratic Party at that stage.
mm,
And the thing about him is at the stage where you had Mandela and you had the Rainbow Nation and everybody coming together now, he was the one person that was standing up and saying, but we still need a strong opposition. Strong opposition is critical to a successful government.
Exactly.
Um, and yeah, it wasn't necessarily a popular thing at that stage. So he really, had to stand up against the tide
Mm,
and say, let's build the strong opposition. And the Democratic Party at that stage was a very small party. But he very skillfully grew the
built it up.
party to the point now where it's um, more than 10 times bigger what it was then. No,
Mm,
20 times bigger almost.
yeah, it's
Um, and yeah, he was just always really brilliant in terms of, whenever there were questions and that. And again, I think it was because he was very values and principles based, that he could always answer any questions based on those values. But yeah, he very successfully built an opposition that has now proved to be critical. After that initial government, all the excitement about it faded away and the corruption really started. Having that vision and pushing for it at the time where it was sort of, well, this is not necessary, was really important. And I think that, after that, Helen Ziller carried that on. And especially in the age of wokeism and woke and that kind of thing, and speaking out again, on different situations like that, where it was not popular to do so.
mm, mm,
And so these have been two leaders where you can always say that they will not take populist positions, and over time they will be proven to be correct.
mm.
And even our current leader, John Steenhuisen, in the COVID times, everybody was talking about masks and hiding away in that. And then it became apparent that it was getting to desperate financial situations. And he was the first one to come out and say, listen, we need to start looking at lives and livelihoods. We can't hide away forever. People are unemployed. They are in dire straits.
Exactly.
And he was howled. He was absolutely howled at, absolutely derided. You want to kill people. You want to put them at risk. You want to put their lives at risk. But over time, he was proven to be correct. And before long, everybody was talking about, okay, lives and livelihoods and that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Um,
But yeah.
so I think, for me, and the commonality that they all have is, number one is that they're really students of everything. I mean, I went with John Steenhuisen because I'm on Home Affairs, and I went with him to an oversight in Johannesburg. I mean, we were there, and the media is there. Of course, they're interested. The party leader is there. But after the cameras went off, John Steenhuisen insisted on coming to the office and speaking to one of the staff in the office, and he was there for about half an hour, just asking about the different problems. What are the problems? Why is this happening? Why is that happening? To get an understanding of what was going on. And I think, they were all like that. Helen Ziller, from personal contact, she studies vociferously what is going on and what is the position, and is happy to take different views or criticisms on things. And so, those are the kind of politicians that have always appealed to me. Those that are values and principles based, that have been able to take a stand, weather the storm, and then come out on top at the end of the day.
Exactly. And you got to keep to those values and skills because politics is a hard game, and having those key skills that you develop over your time is so important because you can use them in any sort of scenario where because as I said, politics is a hard game, and you never know what throws it up. You never know what comes across. So being a strong and skilled politician, having those sort of skills is very, very crucial. But yeah, we'll move on then to our next question then for you, Adrian. What made you run in the 2019 South African election, and what made you join the Democratic Alliance?
Well, looking back, it's probably a bit of madness.
Oh,
But at that stage, again, I think I had that experience with the Sukasambe Children's Home, and seeing that difference that one could make when you really lobby against that injustice. And that is when I got involved with the Democratic Alliance, and I'd been running as a councillor for a while. And so it was a natural next step to really want to go to Parliament and be the voice of the voiceless there. So I think 2019 it was the first opportunity that I'd had where I was in an electable position. But it was a wonderful opportunity to make this your full-time work, because I was very blessed to be in the kind of work where you could make a difference to government organizations and that. But it was in a small space, in a limited space. And for anybody that tries to get into sort of social justice work or social impact work, they will find that, unless you study and then you get into an internship and you go there, it's very difficult to get into that space later on in life. And so it's going to Parliament offered that opportunity to do this kind of work on a full-time basis, and completely focus on it. And so for me, that was the main reason to go, as much as I really loved the work I was doing in the corporate world.
Exactly. And people have different ways of running for parliament. I guess you saw a scenario where you're working for those NGOs, and you really saw the government just not helping you and not pushing those NGOs and not funding them correctly. So I guess in that sense, that really inspired you to run for parliament. And I guess that's a lot of it from what we've heard as well. A lot of politicians are inspired by helping out local community groups, or then they see a problem in their community that's not being fixed, and they'll run just because of that. So it's all about being inspired by certain little things, and that could cause a huge dramatic shift in your life, but it could also be one of the most beneficial moves that you make in your entire career.
Like, I think a lot of persons will also say that, we don't want to have our grandchildren living overseas.
Hmm.
And we are really in South Africa. It's not just a matter of saying, okay, you may be slightly socialist on this party and slightly capitalist on this party or whatever. I mean, we literally have an existential crisis that we were dealing with, and especially in 2019 and even now, which is why we've joined the government of national unity, as opposed to having a coalition of destruction, essentially, where the country can be divided up and given to criminal elements. So we really, as much as one can say you want to help and save the world in that, it's a proper fight, a proper fight for the future of the country, for the future of our children here. I mean, it's that serious here, unfortunately. So I think a lot of members of parliament that are my age, because it is a lot easier, I think, when you're younger and you don't have children, or when you're older and that your children are out of the house now. It's very demanding. It's difficult to juggle that with children and a normal life, in inverted commas. And so for those of us that are sort of my age with young children, and it is a really important driver is to make sure that those children have a future, and that they don't have to go to Australia to get a job and have a life, and you have your grandchildren there. So it really is a critical fight that we're fighting here.
It really is, because this. I mean, I did love the South Africans coming out here, but for your guys' sake, you need people in your country in the future, because if it continues the same, it's a cyclical base where you have just more and more people leaving, and then the next generation gets educated and they leave, and it doesn't change, because at the end of the day, it takes education, and it takes a whole generation to fix a country and to solve a lot of the problems. So it's all about trying to keep people there and trying to entice people to stay. So the work you're doing now is really going to help South Africa, not just 10 and 20 years into the future, but 50, 60 years into the future for sure.
Yeah, that's really, the great thing is now 5 years later and in the next government. So during that 5 years, you often sit and you work really hard, and you think, what, is what you're doing making a difference? You get small wins here and there when you're in opposition, but ultimately the majority party, when they're over 50%, can just steamroll anything you want to do. And to suddenly be in the situation where you have the government of national unity and you have DA ministers in there, and they're making such a profound impact. I mean, it really makes it all worthwhile. You look at the long, hard yards, etc. And it's important that we stick to those fights. I think it's there's much easier work to do, and it's certainly not an easy job.
Exactly.
Even, they say that being a member of parliament is quite a lonely profession, surprisingly enough, considering that you interact with persons a lot. But there are a lot of demands. You have to travel a lot. Um, and, you know, so we're really blessed at the moment to finally have the opportunity to show what we can do, and bring hope to people in South Africa, because they can see, wow, in it's been 100 days now that we've been in power. And if I look at Home Affairs, for example, the changes in what has happened there has been astronomical.
Mm.
And I think it really gives people hope, and it's gonna change things in the future. So the politics is one of those things that it's you do the hard yards and the hard yards, and it seems very slow in that, and then all of a sudden it picks up, and you say, wow, you can't believe that how much things can change in
Exactly.
such a short amount of time. If you look at 1 year ago, the kind of things that I was trying to do with Home Affairs and fight for, and now you have a Home Affairs minister that's just on the job and has one concern, and that is the growing the economy and creating jobs in this country,
Mm.
and what can be done.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're in the fortunate position now where it's still a fight, and we see it in Tshwane. Those forces are very active there, but we're also seeing these green shoots of hope that's coming
Exactly.
through.
I guess
Yeah,
it's I guess you could call it little blue shoots of hope, if you're being a bit more, talking specifically about a
yeah,
political party there. But
no, for
yeah, as you were
sure.
saying, Leon Schreiber, who you're referring to as Minister for Home Affairs, has taken over the portfolio, and as you've been saying, has done a great job, and continued, I guess, the work that you did in opposition as well, Adrian. So hopefully, into the future, for South Africa's sake, there are more Democratic Alliance ministers, and maybe even a whole Democratic Alliance cabinet in the not too distant future. I guess those in South Africa, those in the international world who really do care about the economic prosperity and the future of South Africa, really do hope that is the case. But yes, moving on then to our final question for you, Adrian. I do really appreciate you again coming on the podcast and speaking to us for nearly almost an hour here. But finally, what's one piece of advice you give to students in 2024, especially those who are studying university and high school?
Look, I think from a life point of view, and it's a bit of a corny one, but to invest from as young as you can, to avoid the bells and whistles and wasting your money at a young age, and investing, because what it does for you later on is it gives you freedom. So it might be great, and you're spending your money here and there, and you're drinking away and partying, and enjoying your life. But
I guess short-term pain equals long-term gain in a sense.
yeah, and if you can do that when you're younger, and if you can think about that and make small investments and small putaways, and try and buy that little house or something, try and get on the property ladder, etc.
Exactly.
Um, it's gonna open up your life, because uh, you know these few years that you have now are very short, but there's a lot of life after that. So it's absolutely critical to really start investing, and thinking about that, and thinking what you spend your money on. Um, but yeah, apart from that, I think it's also to don't think that somebody else is going to do things, in your community, for example. And it might be slightly different in Australia, but over here, the communities that are doing well is where individual people also just take a bit of time to pay attention to what's going on, and contribute. And this is
Mm.
what I was speaking about saying, well, if you have an industry association, for example, take a small role and do something small. And all those small things add up, because and to get involved that way, to make sure that your living environment is ultimately a better place. Because if you're always waiting for somebody else to do it, and etc., it's probably not going to happen, and you'll probably
Mm.
end up getting ruled by somebody that you don't really like. So
Exactly. You got to.
pay attention to what's going on. Take a little bit of time to do that, because ultimately, if you don't, yeah, you'll be end up being subject to somebody that you don't like, and that doesn't agree with what you agree with.
Exactly, exactly. And you've got to take initiative sometimes because at the end of the day, if you're seeing something that's not being done upon, not being fixed in your local area, for example, you just sit there and complain. Well, you're part of the problem because you've got to actually go out there and actually push for the change. And sometimes it might be running for parliament, sometimes it might be starting community groups, that sort of thing. So I guess don't sit around and complain about the world's problems when you are technically part of the problem and you can go out there and fix it. So no problem is too big and no solution is too small in a sense.
Yeah, don't underestimate the power of just small actions or a
Exactly.
small intervention. They all add up. Yeah.
100% agree with you there, Adrian. So those are all our interviews for the those are all our questions for the interview. I do really appreciate you coming on the podcast, Adrian, and speaking to us for nearly an hour here. And yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed the experience, and I do really appreciate you talking about your career before politics and your high school university life, your time in politics so far, in Parliament so far, sorry, and some advice you give to students, especially those in South Africa who'll be starting university and high school next year. So from the Donkey Podcast team and all our viewers, thank you again for coming on and sparing some time to speak to us.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Thank you.